Today I'm going to show you three powerful principles you can use with the black pieces to exploit white in the opening. Not only are these ideas going to allow you to equalise easily against white, but in practical games they're going to allow you to have a better win rate. Let's take a look. The first principle we're going to use is with great power comes great responsibility. And this is the idea that comes typically from the French and Caracane. So after e4, e6, d4, d5, for example, one thing you will often see from white is they're pushing their e-pawn all the way to e5, creating a pawn chain with d4 and e5, where the head of the pawn chain is in our half of the board. Now, this is very powerful for white and objectively very good. This pawn restricts our development. For example, our knight can't come to its natural square on f6. However, the responsibility of this powerful pawn comes from keeping it there and keeping it safe. The idea being that we're not going to attack the head of the pawn directly, we're actually going to attack the base of the pawn chain on d4. And in practical games, white finds it very hard to protect this pawn on d4. Eventually it's going to fall, and then following that, the pawn on e5 will fall very easily. Now, we have a video dedicated to exactly this structure in our red flag series. I'm going to leave a link for that in the description below. But fundamentally, the idea is that every single one of our moves is going to revolve around the idea of attacking this base of the pawn chain on d4. So not only is it effective, but it's very simple to find moves in your practical games because everything revolves around this. For example, we might play pawn c5 attacking the pawn, knight c6 attacking it. This knight can reroute to f5 attacking the pawn. This bishop struggles to attack it directly, but it can sometimes come to g5, trading itself for white's dark square bishop, which could in the future protect that pawn. Our queen can often come to b6 attacking the pawn directly. So you can see this underlying principle that all of our moves revolve around undermining this pawn chain. And in practical games, black wins more than white in this structure. Another option you can go for to get exactly the same structure is the Caracane, which starts with the move c6. And after d4, d5, white will often choose to push the pawn to e5, and we're going to have all the same plans revolving around attacking the base of that pawn chain. Now, one problem practically with these two opening ideas in the French defence and the Caracane is that white does not have to commit to that pawn push e5. They have lots of other options in this position. They could play f3 defending the pawn. They could play knight c3, knight d2, both defending the pawn. They could exchange the pawns. All of these avoiding the idea of pushing the pawn to e5 and giving us a simple plan. So this plan is so effective that in practical games, the way I like to achieve it is through something which is actually objectively quite dubious. And it starts with g6, d4, knight f6, and this is the Norwegian rat. The idea is we are baiting white into playing this move e5 because it comes with a tempo against our knight. Now, it's not very clear at this stage how this is going to lead into the exact same structure, but after a few moves, you can start to see how this happens. This knight comes to h5, and after it gets attacked, it can eventually reroute itself into the f5 square, where again it attacks the base of the pawn chain. We could pair this idea with the moves d5, bishop out to exchange with this knight once it develops to f3, e6, and we've got all the same ideas of attacking the base of that pawn chain with things like c5, knight c6, this bishop coming out here, trading with white's dark square bishop. And again, this looks very complicated at the moment with all these arrows, but one thing they all have in common is they are all revolving around this idea of attacking the base of the pawn chain, and we have baited white into getting this pawn chain. Now, to be clear, this position on the board right here is plus 0.8. It is objectively better for white, but in practice, black scores extremely well in this because their plan is simple and white practically finds it hard to hold on to this powerful pawn chain. They have the power, but they can't handle the responsibility. Now, if you would like a video dedicated specifically to the Norwegian rat and how we can force this pawn structure and how to play against it, please leave a comment down below. I'd be happy to make that video. If you're a fan of this style of playing based on overarching principles rather than deep theoretical lines and long memorization, then that's exactly how I teach in my private coaching. You can find a link to my website down below in the description. Now, the second big principle we're going to use relates to what I was suggesting for white in our previous series, which was exploitative chess openings for white. And it's the idea that what white wants in the opening is a development lead. They're willing to sacrifice pawns to get it. Then they want to open the position and launch a quick attack against our king and checkmate us before the game reaches an endgame. Now, one fundamental part of that plan for white is that their most powerful piece in those quick attacks is their queen. So one principle for black is to go for an early queen exchange and play a queenless middle game. So one way you can implement this idea with black is to start with the move d6, wait for the move d4 from white, and when it comes to respond with e5 and you get an early queen exchange. So for example, you start with d6, d4, e5, and after this exchange, white cannot resist the queen exchange because they are depriving us of our castling rights. Now, in white's mind, because we can no longer castle, they have an advantage and they're going to launch a quick attack against us. The position is open, but what they have failed to notice is that the queens are off the board. It is not going to be possible for them to deliver a quick attack. These queenless middle games take on a completely different flavour compared to typical chess positions. Our main priority here is going to be strategic and positional. We don't need to worry about losing to quick attacks. Now, in practice, what happens here is white presses too hard, thinking they have an advantage, and it backfires. And black has an incredible win rate in these structures if you know how to play them. Now, if you would like to see a dedicated video to these structures, please let me know in the comments below. I'll be happy to make a video all about this particular idea and how you can use it against all of white's opening ideas. This is a special week for the channel as we have passed the 100 subscriber mark. Now, as a special thank you to all of you who have been following us so far, I would like to offer a free private lesson to one of you, no strings attached. If you're subscribed, please leave a comment down below. I'll be picking a name at random. The final principle we have relates to this idea that white wants a development lead and to open the game quickly. Now, I want to point out that white's method of opening the game is after we play a move like e5, for example, is at some point they will play d4, creating tension between central pawns, and as central pawns get traded with each other, the game starts to open up, which benefits white. So for example here, a typical line I recommend from the white side is something like knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, and this position is the Scotch gambit, very effective for white. White has a development lead, the position is opening up, and they're going to deliver a quick attack against us. Now, with that idea in mind, white was able to open the position due to this central tension between central pawns. Now, a very effective way to neutralize this idea as black is to simply not allow white to create this central tension in the first place. The way we could implement that idea in practice is to refuse to push any of our pawns forward by 2 squares in the opening until after our king is already safe. And this is the underlying theme of the modern structures. So, for example, we could start with g6, d4, bishop g7. We are just developing our kingside minor pieces quickly so we can get castled, and only then will we look for play in the center of the board. So like knight f3, we want to play knight f6 so we can castle, but we want to avoid e5, so we often start with d6. But once again, notice we're pushing this pawn 1 square, avoiding pushing it 2 squares, where it is now in a position of tension with enemy pawns, and the position could open up. So the game might continue with knight c3, knight f6, let's say bishop e2, for example. Black finally castles, and notice we have prioritized getting our king safe before committing any pawns forward by 2 squares where they would be accessible to pawn breaks from white. Therefore, the position is not opening up quickly. White cannot exploit their development lead quickly, and they cannot launch a quick attack against our uncastled king because our king is now castled. One of the drawbacks of this structure is that now that you have this safe setup, you will need to know some theory in order to know how to proceed from here into your middle game plans. Now, if you would like to see a video based on these structures and how to actually play them going into the middle game, please leave a comment down below. So to summarize today, we've seen 3 fundamental principles you can use as black to exploit white in the opening. One idea is to aim for these advanced variations where you allow white to get a big center and push a pawn to e5. This is great power for white, having a pawn in our half of the board, but it also comes with great responsibility because they have to protect the base of that pawn chain, and in practical games they fail to do so. The second principle is understanding that white wants to open the position and launch a quick attack, which requires them to keep queens on the board. But by inviting these early queen exchanges, white typically cannot resist them because it deprives us of our right castle. Now, in these queenless middle games where we're not going to be the victim of a quick attack, it's actually quite beneficial for us to have our king in the centre of the board, and white often overpresses in these positions and it backfires on them in practical games. And the third principle we used was that white cannot open the position quickly if we refuse to push any of our pawns forward by 2 squares. If we delay any play in the centre until after our king is safe, white will not be able to deliver a quick attack against our uncastled king. I'd love to hear in the comments below which of these principles sounds the most interesting to you and which one would you like to see a dedicated video on. I use all of these ideas in my own practical games and they score incredibly well for black. As always, please like this video, please share it, please make sure you're subscribed, and come back next week where we're going to be doing a deep dive into one of these structures with the black pieces. See you next time.